Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my presentation. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and I'm very excited to show you my research. So my name is Chloe Russell, I'm an artist/science communicator and I'm just finishing my Masters in Science Communication here in Bristol. And for my final research project, I asked the question, how can we use sonification to create connections to the environment? And this is a creative practice as study project, which means I've created something and then I've evaluated how the public responded to it. And here I present to you Galera. I'm really excited to share this with you today. Galera was inspired by an expedition I went on 2 years ago to eastern Greenland to measure climate change and oceanic plastic pollution. Now, Galera is a nature documentary podcast that uses dialogue from the artists and scientists from the expedition, soundscapes I recorded on the expedition, and original written music. The expedition was led by PhD student Anne Lydia Wainwright, who was photo-documenting the glaciers and comparing them to images taken 80 years ago. That way she could measure how climate change had impacted in this environment. We also had marine biologists with us, and they brought a manta trawl to measure the plastic that they were seeing in the water. I've included this interactive map that one of our marine biologists has made, and each tag represents a moment where a photograph has been taken and its geotagging metadata has been inputted into the map. So you can see the days are on the top right, which I'm clicking over here, and each day represents a day in the expedition. In this slide we see the voices within Kalerrâ, including Amy Pryor, Wanda Bodner, Anne Lydia, Laura Williams, and myself, Chloe Russell. Now, I'd like to share with you a short soundbite of the first episode in Galera. I hope you enjoy that.
It was nothing, yet sort of everything. The silence, the peace, the closeness of nature wasn't like that before when I was offshore. So this was definitely something else. Everything just got filtered out through this whiteness and blueness and nature, and then a lot of the things, they were just left behind.
So now we have the background of Galera in check, let's revisit the research question. Now, we've all seen nature documentaries on television. They've inspired many generations to pursue their interest in the natural world and beyond. But how does this translate through audio? Would people be interested in listening to the natural world? Does taking the visual away defeat the purpose of entertainment education? Could audio alone inspire people as it does through watching documentaries? So first things first, delving into previous research and deconstructing the elements within this main research question. Podcasts. Who here listens to podcasts? I'll pretend like I can see a glorious amount of hands up right now. So podcasts are a great resource in science communication. They offer a two-way dialogue through facilities like social media and website comment sections. They also offer flexibility. Listeners are given control of what they listen to and when they want to. And lastly, science podcasts have become a varied and abundant avenue for science communication. They cover many different topics, audiences, and formats. Next, we look at sight art. So art often communicates below the level of consciousness and has a unique capacity to shape and connect our understandings, values, and emotions, and motivate us to change our behaviours in response. We can use art as a way of communicating complicated sciences. And I'd like to pull out an example of ocean literacy meets science communication, which some of you may be familiar with. It's called Project Zero at Carnaby Street. And the iconic Carnaby Street in London transformed into this theatrical underwater scene representing areas of the ocean that needed conservation. Next, we're going to look at sonification. So sonification is the use of non-speech audio to convey information and meaning. And there are two subcategories of sonification which will be adopted in this practice. Firstly, auditorial icons, which are basically oral metaphors. They create a natural connection between the data and the sound, and this is where the sound is intuitive to listeners. Secondly, we use musification. This can be defined as the musical representation of data, and applying a set of musical constraints to data offers the listeners to engage and analyse the music, a process which listeners do automatically and intuitively. And lastly, another useful tool in science communication is narrative. A narrative offers connection and familiarity and helps us make sense of the world. It can create a link between science and society through simple, clear messages. And people can often follow complicated narratives naturally, which is a great source for science communication. Overall, the responses from listening to Galera was positive. Participants expressed they felt calm after listening to the music, concerned after listening to the science, and immersed from the soundscapes and the stories. So to achieve these results, there were 3 types of evaluation methods to use. Firstly, a pilot activity was used to compare how 2 groups of participants responded to, firstly, an audio-visual preview of Kalerrâ, and secondly, an audio-only preview of Galera. And these results helped develop the making of the full podcast. The next 2 stages involved distributing a new survey alongside the release of Galera, and collecting metadata from listeners outside the survey was also taken. So the pilot activity participants who listened to the preview found it more immersive than watching it. They also preferred the dialogue more than the music, or even a combination of them both. And this could suggest that participants who are listening only are more engaged with the storytelling and the science. And finally, both groups found listening to have a calming effect. Next, we look at the main survey, which received a total of 46 participants. The majority of them found it pleasant, immersive, and much like the audio-only group from the pilot activity, they preferred the dialogue. Next, we look at the statistics from Spotify. Looking at these statistics help us understand which publics are engaging with the podcast and how their demographic characteristics affect this, which is useful to integrate data with the main survey response. The Spotify platform was chosen to represent the listeners' statistics as this was the most used podcast platform for Galera. In these next slides, we look at the discussion from the study. There are 4 tools for answering the main research question. First, we look at the use of emotion. Survey participants mostly described feeling calm, concerned, and connected. The most popular feeling was calm, which I'd like to go back to later in this presentation. You might have noticed earlier that 70% of survey participants felt listening was a pleasant experience, which contradicts feelings of concern. However, one participant explains why this could be, and they say, "It is difficult to talk about emotional response to Galera without reflecting on the environmental issues." And that was in a way juxtaposed against the serenity of the soundscape. And finally, we have participants expressing they feel connected. And this was a great result for the main research question of how we can create connections to the environment. As Galera has immersed people into the Greenlandic environment, they are therefore connected into nature. So let's take a deeper look into this use of immersion. The majority of participants found Galera immersive. This result builds on existing research of transportation narratives, a type of immersion which occurs when a listener becomes fully absorbed in their narrative world. Transportation narratives also become influential if they are enjoyed, which this study supports, as 70% of participants agreed listening was a pleasant experience. And female survey participants found Galera to be more immersive, but it doesn't end there. They actually found it to be more pleasant and informative. And this would also explain why there are more female listeners on Spotify. Next, we move on to aesthetics. Participants expressed their love of the music in Galera and found that the use of music, soundscapes and sound design helped them focus on the storytelling and the science. The simple, that is, the beautiful, brings understanding more readily. Without the attractive music and thoughtfully placed soundscapes, we risk the science not being absorbed by listeners. Next, we move on to our final discussion point, which is the use of imagination. The following result was a positive surprise and was drawn from the pilot activity survey. I asked participants to describe what mental images they were imagining whilst listening, and then I inputted their answers into a word cloud, and these were the results. Word clouds work by making the most used word the biggest, so in this instance water, blue, and landscape were used most often. Thinking linearly, yes, participants are correct in describing the environment of the expedition of Greenland, but what does thinking of water and blue do to our brains? Exposure to blue light has been shown to produce physical, cognitive, and emotional benefits. Due to its specific wavelength, the colour blue is known to exert a calming, relaxing, yet energising effect, and thus simulate a positive emotional response. And this research correlates and supports the results of this study that participants are painting blue water environments in their mind, which evokes feelings of calmness, pleasantness, and positivity. And you could also suggest that thinking blue stimulates sadness, which some of these participants did feel. So, to summarise, we have looked at how the use of emotion, immersion, aesthetics, and imagination can be a useful tool in future practices like this. By combining all of these elements, we can further pursue similar practices like this by successfully connecting people to the environment through sonification. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my research and learning about Galera. To listen, you can find it on all popular podcast platforms. And keep an eye out, or I should say keep an ear out for new projects under Kalerrâ. And if you're interested in being involved with our future projects, then please do get in touch. Thank you, and I am ready to answer any of your questions.